Dr. Alan Botkin was a Pennsylvania state licensed psychotherapist for over 20 years in a Veterans Administration hospital. Among the most distressing post-traumatic stress memories combat veterans suffer from is seeing their fellow soldiers, innocent civilians, and even enemy soldiers killed in battle. Dr. Botkin was surprised when one of the veterans he was counseling had a vivid afterlife communication with the person for whom he was grieving. The experience reduced his grief in a single session. In this video, I describe what Dr. Botkin was doing that resulted in the afterlife communication. I include narrations of 3 accounts of successful afterlife communications clients had while sitting in his office. Hello, I'm Dr. R. Craig Hogan, President of the Afterlife Research and Education Institute and Seek Reality Online. I'm the author of 8 books containing the evidence you will come to the end of this life, but you will never die. I co-authored the book Induced After-Death Communication, A Miraculous Therapy for Grief and Loss, with a psychotherapist named Dr. Alan Botkin, who discovered the Induced After-Death Communication Therapy Method, or IADC. Dr. Botkin was a psychotherapist at a Veterans Administration hospital. He counseled combat veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder from their experiences in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other combat situations. Dr. Botkin was using a powerful new therapy procedure called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, to help the veterans overcome their post-traumatic stress from their war experiences. During EMDR therapy, the psychotherapist has the clients move their eyes back and forth following the psychotherapist's hand movements while they think of the disturbing images connected to their trauma and grief. The clients then close their eyes to allow images and thoughts associated with their grief and sadness to reprocess. The procedure has remarkable results, often healing clients in a single session. Dr. Botkin was surprised during one therapy session when a vet named Sam told him that as he sat with his eyes closed in Dr. Botkin's office, he had an afterlife communication with a young girl he had befriended during his tour in Vietnam, who was killed tragically when she was caught in a firefight. This is the account of what happened from our book, Induced After-Death Communication, A Miraculous Therapy for Grief and Loss.
While serving in Vietnam, Sam had developed a very close relationship with Lee, a 10-year-old orphaned Vietnamese girl. She had made Sam's base camp her home after both of her parents were killed in the war. She helped with daily chores on the base and in return was given food, shelter, and companionship. Each time Sam's unit returned from his patrols in the jungle, Lee would pick him out of the group, run to him, and give him a hug. After several months, Sam decided to adopt Lee and bring her home. However, orders came from headquarters that all orphaned Vietnamese children on the base were to be sent to a Catholic orphanage in a distant village. Sam was devastated. A few days later, Sam, in tears, helped load Lee and the other orphaned Vietnamese children onto a flatbed truck to take them to the orphanage. Just as they got all the children onto the truck, shots rang out, and Sam and the other soldiers quickly pulled the children off the truck to safety. The shooting stopped as quickly as it had started, and they began to put the children back onto the truck. Nearly all of the children were back on the truck when Sam realized he didn't see Lee. He walked to the back of the truck and saw her lying face down with a spot of blood on her back. Sam rolled her over and was horrified to see that her front torso was blown open from a bullet that had entered her back. Sam sat on the ground holding her lifeless body and cried. Other soldiers eventually had to pull Sam away and take Lee's body to bury her. The incident caused Sam's psychological undoing. For the remainder of his tour in Vietnam, he numbed the pain of his profound loss with anger and rage, volunteering for dangerous patrols to kill any enemy he could find or be killed himself. After Vietnam, he returned to the States and fathered a daughter of his own, but avoided her for years because she triggered anger, guilt, deep sadness over Lee's death, and gruesome images of Lee's dead body. For nearly 28 years, Sam spent most of his days secluded alone in the basement of his home, separated physically and psychologically from his family. To help him open up and work through the grief that was dominating his life, I decided to use EMDR. Sam sobbed quietly from the overwhelming pain of his grief. While tears ran down his face, I administered the eye movement procedure and asked him to close his eyes. The tears that had been flowing from his closed eyes suddenly stopped, and he smiled broadly. He giggled softly. When he opened his eyes, he was euphoric. He said, "When I closed my eyes, I saw Lee as a beautiful woman with long black hair, in a white gown surrounded by a radiant light. She seemed genuinely happier and more content than anyone I had ever known." Sam's tear-reddened face glowed. He continued, "She thanked me for taking care of her when she died. I said, 'I love you, Lee,' and she said, 'I love you too, Sam.' And she put her arms around me and embraced me. Then she faded away." Sam was ecstatic and absolutely convinced that he had just communicated with Lee. "I could actually feel her arms around me," he proclaimed.
Sam was having a real experience of communicating with Lee, who was very much alive and well in the afterlife. She had grown from the child she was into a young woman. Today, hundreds of psychotherapists have learned the IADC procedure, and thousands of people have had uplifting, healing, afterlife communications with the people for whom they're grieving. This is a narration of another account of an afterlife communication a client named Sally experienced while sitting in Dr. Botkin's office.
"I just cry for no reason," Sally wept, clutching a wet handkerchief. Her depression wasn't responding to medications, so she was referred to me. As we talked, it became clear that she was deeply in grief over her father's death 5 years ago. When she was ready, I used EMDR to reduce her overwhelming sadness and the pain of the images of her father dying. After the sadness had decreased, I initiated the IADC procedure and asked her to close her eyes and go with whatever happened. After a moment, with her eyes still closed, she said, "I can see him. He looks healthy again. He looks happy. Grandma and Grandpa are with him, and 2 of my aunts, and my uncle who died long ago. They're partying, laughing. Oh, they're enjoying themselves. They're in a room filled with bright white light." She opened her eyes and looked at me. "I could feel their happiness," she said excitedly. "I was wishing I could be with my father. I don't mean suicide. I just wanted to be with him now, but I know I can't." I started another IADC procedure while she held that thought in mind. The same scene came back, but there was more. He walked right up to me and said he was still with me in a very important way, that I should continue to take care of my children, and that he would come for me when it was my time. She smiled warmly through gently flowing tears. When Sally left my office that day, all her grief and pain over the death of her father were gone. As she was leaving, she said, "That was absolutely amazing. As soon as I felt I was reconnected with them, my sadness vanished. I knew that was really them. I'll have to tell my brother about this. I know he'll think I'm a raving lunatic, but I don't care. I feel great." From that day on, Sally no longer experienced any symptoms of depression.
The experiences these clients have reduce their grief dramatically in ways standard grief therapy cannot. The experiences are not hallucinations or daydreaming or imagination. They come to the client spontaneously with messages the client needs to hear, but would not have created on their own. They are real encounters with their loved ones alive and well in the afterlife. In a third successful induced after-death communication experience, Dr. Botkin had a session with a man named Peter, whose wife had just died 2 days before the session. This is the account from our book.
At the time he came to me, Peter wanted help coping with his wife's death, just 2 days before our session. She had fallen down a flight of stairs, and paramedics could do nothing to save her. I used EMDR to help him calm himself. His sadness mounted until he was sobbing and shaking his head. It then started to subside. I administered 2 more sets of eye movements, and the IADC experience began while his eyes were closed. "I can see my wife," he said. "She's beautiful. She's radiant, surrounded by bright light." After a moment, he opened his eyes. She told me not to be angry with the paramedics. She said she was dead by the time she hit the bottom of the stairs. His tone became agitated. Then she started telling me of what to do with the kids. Do this, do that. I wanted her to talk about me and my feelings, not the kids. Peter was narcissistic, so he was angry when messages were about his children. He expected them to be about him and nothing else. We did another set of eye movements. He closed his eyes and sat quietly for a minute. When he opened his eyes, he explained. She said, "It's okay. You'll get over it in time. It's okay." She also said for me to stay away from the new business venture I'm about to begin. And something else. Her father was there. He died years ago. Why was he there? I said, "Why don't you ask him?" We did another set of eye movements, and Peter closed his eyes. After a few seconds, he opened them and explained. He said, "I'm here because we are together now. That's the relationship we always had. I'm here because I love my daughter. We do what we have always done." Peter was still sad about his wife's death and wondered why. We agreed he would go back to the scene and ask his father-in-law why he was still feeling sad. I administered a set of eye movements while Peter thought about his father-in-law. Peter went back into the IADC and asked his father-in-law, "Why do I still feel sad about this?" He said his father-in-law replied, "Because you still don't understand death. But in time you will." His wife ended by saying to him, "I love you and will always be with you and the kids."
Being narcissistic, Peter was irritated that the afterlife communication was not focused on him, demonstrating that the experience was not coming from Peter's imagination and expectations. It was different enough from what he would have wanted that it angered him. This wonderful gift to humankind developed by Dr. Botkin has helped thousands of people to have afterlife communications with the people they love now living in the afterlife. Today, hundreds of psychotherapists are using the procedure successfully with clients. A link to Dr. Botkin's website with lists of psychotherapists using the IADC procedure is in the descriptions below. The successful afterlife communications are further evidence. You will come to the end of this life, but you will never die.